Welcome back to my channel. I hope you all had a lovely Christmas. What I'm doing right now is a thing called Nålebinding, and this is one of the skills that I'm wanting to learn this year. Nålebinding is a one needle knitting, similar to knitting and crocheting, except this is a lot slower. It's also a lot sturdier as well, and this was also around a lot earlier than knitting and crocheting. To do Nålebinding, or at least in order to do the stitch I'm currently doing, which is referred to as the Oslo stitch, it is quite easy to pick up once you get into the rhythm of it. A lot of these stitches can seem a bit baffling depending on what hand you are, or if you're used to crocheting or even knitting. But if you have your own needle, you have some wool, and you have someone to show you, you'd hopefully be able to do it. The oldest Nålebinded textile found dates back to about 6,500 BC. This was found, now don't quote me on this, I'm not very good with names, but it was found in a cave called Nahal Hema in Israel. And the oldest item found that had been Nålebinded was a pair of socks from Egypt, which were red and looked a bit like this. It seems to be that everybody in Egypt had duck feet. Or at least that's what it looked like. No. Basically, the reason why the socks are made this way is because it was to adapt with the fact that they were wearing sandals at the time. Most of the needles used that I found have either been made out of bone, wood, or even antler. But I suppose it depends on what sort of thing you're wanting to make. If you wanted a very fine stitch, then it wouldn't hurt to use a metal needle. But most people, even back in the past, would use mostly antler needles. These are quite soft, and you can get different sizes, some massive, some small, and depending on what sort of thing you want to make, whether it be gloves, socks or hats, really depends on what sort of needle you wanted. It also depends on the quality of your wool, the thickness of your wool, and also how relevantly quickly you want to be able to finish your project. Nålebinding, now this is debatable, but it's said is quite a slow stitch. Knitting is said to be faster. But when you do Nålebinding, your project is a lot sturdier, so it means that any mistakes you make doesn't unravel it. You can easily cut it out, doesn't affect the rest of your project, unlike knitting where it does unravel if you do make a mistake, to the point that you even have to put a border around some of your projects sometimes. Nålebinding is mostly associated with the Viking period, with them making a variety of different things from hats and gloves and even socks. And we know that they were making things like this because we actually found one at York, at Coppergate, which is now referred to as the Coppergate sock. The sock was Nålebinded and was used in a technique known as the York stitch, or at least that's what we call it today. The York stitch is very similar to the Oslo stitch, a stitch I will show you shortly. But the York stitch is a bit more twisty, a bit more turny on itself, and the stitch itself was actually very, very fine. It was said that it took roughly about maybe 100 hours to make a pair of socks, and the sock itself actually has a red rim around the top, which is very interesting. This sock is similar to like a trainer sock. There's nothing to suggest that it was any taller than what it is or anything like that, even though it's got a red rim, but that's purely for decoration. Many of the stitches today that we use are basically from items that were found in those said areas. There are different stitches to learn, such as the man stitch, the brooding stitch, and the Oslo stitch, which I'll now show you how to do. Okay, so to start off with your Nålebinding, you need to have a needle similar to like this. You can get ones made out of plastic, you can even probably get quite large metal ones as well. This one here is made out of bone. This is to try and be as an authentic as possible needle for what they may have had in the Viking period. You then get your wool. Now this is the bit that's a little bit annoying for me because my needle is a bit broken, as you can probably see. I don't have the hole at the top, but I do have a slit just here. So all you do is you feed it through the hole, like so. There we go. And then, next thing we do is we pinch it between our thumb and finger, like so, and wrap it around our thumb, so it looks like that with a cross. Put your needle underneath that cross, so it should look something like that, and then feed it through. Bearing in mind, this is all done left-handedly, because I'm a left-handed individual. You then unhook your previous hoop and alter your new hoop on your thumb so it should look something like this, with the hoop on your back and your new hoop that you've just created around the front. Then you put your needle again through that back hoop, do a slight twist and go under the one on your thumb, so it should look something like this underneath where the cross would have been previously. And then again, you just feed through. Unhook the back, alter it with your new hoop, alter your new hoop with your thread, so it should look something like this. And then again, just keep putting your needle through your back hoop. You can also pick it up your other one if you have not made it as small. Again, twist and go under the one on your thumb, like so, and pull through. So as you keep going and changing it on your thumb like this, again, put your needle through the hoop, put it under the cross on your thumb, pull through. The more you do this, the more it'll feel like you're going to have a big massive mess on the back of your thumb. But persevere, just keep going. Feed through. Put the needle through that, twist and go under the one on my thumb, pull through. So the wool I'm using is artificial wool, so I can't actually do much with this. If you get real wool, you can actually attach your wool onto your wool. So if you, for instance, come to the end of your thread, or wool should I say, come to the end of the bit that you've cut off, you can then add on more and all will be well. You can just keep on going, which is something that they probably would have done when they originally did this. It's just kept on going. But like I said, this is artificial, so if I try to do anything with this wool, to try and add it on, unfortunately it doesn't exactly do much, because this wool is, believe it or not, quite rubbish. Now be careful when you're putting your needle underneath your wool on your thumb. Sometimes you can stab through your wool, which is what I've just done. Keep going, keep going. So again, it'll still probably feel like a bit of a mess on the back of your thumb, but persevere. I promise you, something good will happen at the end of it. It's very time consuming, unfortunately, nail binding is, because it's a very slow process, unlike knitting or crocheting, which is a lot faster. Oops, slipped off my needle. Oh, and I've made that a bit too tight. That can happen as well on occasion. So depending on how many stitches you make, depends on what it is you're wanting to make. So for instance, for example, I've just started making myself some fingerless gloves. It took a good couple of 100 stitches just to do the first little bit, I must admit. And it is very time consuming. Okay. So I'll do a couple more stitches. So again, through the thumb, one on the back of the thumb, go underneath the cross on your thumb and pull through. Oh, again I've made it a bit too tight. Unhook. And one more for now. So what you may have come out with at the end is a strip, like this. Now you can work with this strip, now that you've done one, depending on what sort of length you want. So I've got it on the back of my thumb, my normal stitch, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pick up a previous stitch, just like this, like that, and then I'm picking up the one on the back of my thumb, and then I'm twisting and going under the thread on my thumb, and you just keep going. Oh. So undo that. So again, I am picking up a previous stitch already done, like that, and then I'm picking up the one on the back of my thumb, the hoop that you should have, and then I'm going underneath where the cross was originally again and going through. So this is just one of the ways you're able to make stuff. For example, a friend of mine recently showed me how she makes socks. So some people say you'd start with a slip knot and then you do the stitch around the slip knot, and then you can turn it from your normal blanket stitch from the slip knot into the Oslo stitch. Not really been shown how to do that, but my friend said the way she does it is she starts off with a strip like this, and then she wraps it around like a spiral, attaching it together, sort of like what we're doing now, but we're not doing a spiral, we're just going back up the row. So as you can see, it looks a little bit of a mess on the back of my thumb, like that. So we'll just keep going. Hopefully we'll get something good. And after she's done the spiral, she then builds it out like normal. So she then builds it out like normal, and then she's able to start at least the front of the sock, which we think is similar to the York stitch. Which we think is similar to the stitch on the York or Coppergate sock. Similar. Not exactly. The Coppergate sock has got what is called the York stitch, which is very twisty and turny. Very fiddly indeed. Whereas this one here is the Oslo stitch. So it's a bit easier. So if I stop that. Okay. Right. And as I stop that, that's what I've got so far. My strips. And if I wanted, I could keep going back and forth, and I could probably start a mini blanket or whatever project I might have. So all I've done there is I went back on my previous stitch, which was the first row I started with, as well as picking up my back stitch on the back of my thumb and going under the one on my thumb underneath the cross like you do when you first start. So you should come out with something like that. And here is a close-up of that stitch. Don't worry if you're struggling with doing that stitch. All you need to do is just re-watch the video. Bear in mind it is for lefties, but people who are right-handed as well should be able to do it as well. Just flip it over to your right hand. All you need is a decent needle, decent wool, and lots of patience. It took me a fair bit of time to actually pick up the stitch before I decided to show you. Nålebinding is still something that is going on today. In places like Peru and Israel, they still use this to make socks. And in Scandinavia, they still use this stitch to make hats and gloves. As Vikings and things like that have grown in popularity, so has this Nålebinding technique. It's come back. It's one of those things where it died down up until the 1950s, and then pretty much nobody really bothered with it, except for the odd places like I've just mentioned. But with many things, and with TV shows such as Vikings and stuff like that, getting people interested in these sort of periods, and with going to museums and learning about these things, this is hopefully growing back in popularity. It's definitely a skill I never heard of until quite recently. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you've maybe learnt a new skill. And until next time, keep on learning.